Good evening to you. Welcome to week number 3, Seminar on Sexual Violence. Professor Jen here. Always a pleasure to see you, be with you on these discussions. So relevant, so important. Anyway, happy spring. Today's first day of spring, so yippee, here we are. If I look down and away, it's just because I'm checking my notes. I have a lot of things I want to cover tonight. And before we continue, I want to thank Captioning Services for everything that they're doing for us, because without them, we wouldn't have this virtual world. So thank you. The first thing I'd like to discuss, which I'll put up for you tomorrow in chat, is our literary review that is going to be due for me on Monday, April 1st, sent to me in my Dropbox. It will be 2 to 3 pages long, typed, obviously, and it's going to be a topic that I think you'll enjoy. The topic will be, you will pick one of the films of your choosing from the list that I gave you, or if you've already contacted me about another film and I've approved it, I would like you to talk about that film, and I'd like you to isolate for me in 2 to 3 pages exactly the issue of sexual violence and how you see it within the body of that film, whether it has to do with manipulation, the actual acts, intimidation, PTSD, whatever your posture is. But I would like you to look at a film, if you haven't already, and your literary review will be about the film of your choosing, 2 to 3 pages, sent to me April 1st, which is a Monday, in my Dropbox. I also want to talk a little bit about the Good Friday Project, GOOD Friday, Good Friday Project we have going on, and this will be a nice introduction to an unfortunate lecture. Apparently, one of our RIT students has been sexually assaulted. It's been on the news, and it's been a known subject for quite some time now on campus these past several days. It is fitting that since we're a seminar on sexual violence class and we're discussing these circumstances, that perhaps we should do something rather than just be academic and say, well, gee, that's a shame that happened to that person. Maybe we should do something. This is what I propose we do. No later than Good Friday, by 10 a.m. in the morning, I've appointed your classmate colleagues, Robert Harris and Gina Reeder, to collect items such as granola bars, tea bags, candles, magazines, books, and most important, anything that you wish to write to the victim, which I'm not allowed to say if it's male or female. Anything you wish to write to the victim is a word of encouragement you will send to me at my mailbox, jwolfley@yahoo.com. And I will include it in what it is that I put together for this person as a wellness basket. It's not a present, a wellness basket, as they're recovering from something unplanned that they didn't expect and will have changed the course of their life forever. If you'd like to be part of that person's wellness, again, an item can be dropped off to your 2 classmates. Work it out with them, but I need it no later than 10 a.m. on Good Friday. If you wish to write a letter of encouragement, I will be accepting it in my mailbox at jwolfley@yahoo.com, and I will put it in for this person to have. Which leads me to my next discussion, as we've been talking in the chat room and doing our readings. By the way, the chat room has really taken off, and I'm very pleased. A few of you aren't participating as I hoped you would, but that's a choice that you've made. I'd like to talk about what victims have said to me in the course of all these years of working with people. And there are 2 basic principles, if I may share with you, that have really compelled me and continue to compel me. And they're the topics of disassociation and isolation. First, we'll discuss disassociation, a psychological term. Disassociation happens to most victims regardless of gender, regardless of age, and regardless of the circumstance of the attack. It doesn't always have to be a sexual attack. Persons that are often in war situations also talk about disassociation. I'll give you an example. I went to graduate school in the 1990s, early 1990s, when we were involved in various wars in some very sandy countries. And I remember I had this classmate colleague who, on a few occasions, I dated when I was an undergraduate. And he had gone into selective service. And then, in order to get the financial aid for him to go to college fully, he had signed up for the service. He was a much different person when we were both undergraduates together and we dated briefly. After he came back from war, I almost didn't recognize him. So you say, well, Professor Jen, what does this have to do with seminar on sexual violence? He suffered from something called dissociative disorder. He wasn't sexually abused out in the field. Rather, he saw so many of his comrades, his colleagues, people like your age now, that he'd gone to basic training with, that were part of his infantry. He saw them with their legs shot off, parts of their brain shot off, parts of their arms missing, or they just died right there. They couldn't take the stress. People in their 20s do have heart attacks when they're scared to death. And this fellow that I had dated, when he came back from war, he had shared with me that as all of this was going on around him, he said that he would literally go to different places in his mind, and often he would think about water and skipping stones. He said in his mind, out in the middle of this field where mines were blowing up and bombs were going off and bullets were flying over his head, he said he almost felt like he was floating and watching it all as if it was a picture show that was there for his entertainment. One of you in the class talked about the film Precious, Precious, and one of you had mentioned in the chats, and I was pleased that you did, that she disassociates as well. Yes, she does. Every time she sees something uncomfortable in her life, or she feels something uncomfortable, or the threat of discomfort, she goes into an imaginary place where she does what? Thinks about a very handsome man on a motorcycle rescuing her from her current situation. Don't we all do this to some degree, this thing called disassociation? Some of you may go to the dentist and you have to wear earbuds and bring your little MP3 player or anything just not to hear the drill, because you really don't want to be there, but you have to. Very often, rape victims and persons of sexual violence, as well as physical violence and emotional battering, because that's important also. People wind up going to places in their mind because they can't stand the situation they're currently in. So they go on escapes. This happens very often. This is why when persons who are victims of sexual assault very frequently are unable to recall all of the things that happened to them in great detail, because it's almost as if they checked out for a temporary period of time, though they were there. In fact, many people report with dissociative and disassociation through an event that's usually very unpleasant. It's almost like they're watching third party what's happening to them as they are literally floating around the room. I've looked into this academically as well as emotionally, and I think it's our body in conflict with itself. This is what I think. I might be wrong, but this is what I think. I don't know. I think that disassociation is actually healthy to some degree, because the physical and emotional sense of the body is telling the intellectual part, it's time for you to leave now, because this is so horrible that we're going to protect you, meaning the body and the emotional state from the intellectual state. That's just my theory. It's not proven, but I think I'm on the right track to something after having worked in this field for 2 decades. I want to talk about isolation and what it is that persons who suffer from victimization find themselves in a place called isolation. And this isolation works in a number of ways. It can do things to somebody like deteriorate their social life through depression, isolation, PTSD, severe anxiety, severe panic, severe withdrawal. It can definitely impact somebody's academic studies. It can impact somebody's ability to go do laundry in a location that perhaps never frightened them before, but all of a sudden, since something has occurred to them in one of these horrible events, they're afraid. They're afraid that they can't protect themselves. I've met people that have suffered so much from PTSD and anxiety disorders that stemmed from a sexual attack that sometimes they weren't even able to walk from their car into a building without having somebody go with them because they were just so petrified that something terrible would happen to them. Again, though there was no immediate threat, they were convinced something terrible was going to happen to them again. It might sound odd to you that people suffer this, but after somebody's had really a severe event, a traumatic event happen in their life, very often they adopt a fight or flight attitude. And in the fight or flight, it can go one of two ways. Flight, meaning isolation, or fight, meaning that the adrenaline is going and the person becomes very aggressive and can sometimes be very hostile in a trigger situation. Let me give you an example, if I may, because so many of you have referenced the film Sleeping with the Enemy, one of my favorites, in fact. She goes through fight and flight in that particular film. We see somebody who winds up so incredibly isolated because of fear, because of lack of social support, emotional support, the fact that she's isolated financially, she's isolated in the middle of her geographic region. What faces her when she looks out the window? A lot of water. It's almost very hard for her to have an interchange and exchange with other people. And when she does, we find out later that she actually lies to the group of women in her swim class and tells them that all the bruising on her body is from what? Gymnastics. She can't begin to admit that her husband's beating her. The isolation must be devastating for people who go into this place. I think about the student at RIT that was a victim of sexual abuse. I feel bad for that person because they must be going through some sense of isolation as they walk through campus. And maybe if I was on campus today and I had my yellow sweater on and my black and yellow dress here with my big polka dots and my flowery backpack with a coffee in one hand and my hair blowing in the wind, maybe I would appear as though life is a good game and nothing has happened to me. And maybe a victim, such as the victim that we have at RIT sitting with us tonight, wherever he or she may be, might be thinking to themselves, gee, how does the whole world go on and I'm suffering by myself? Maybe the world might even appear cruel for a brief moment or two. As the person says, how can everybody be so carefree on the first day of spring and look what's happened to me? That's isolation. It's not that we meant to do this to this person. It's just that what happens is that the person sometimes winds up in a place where there's nowhere left to go other than face what it is that happened to them. I remember I had a client on my caseload whose daughter at the age of 12 was brutally raped. And the client happened to have been a prostitute. And she took the whole thing extremely hard, as any mother would. And she said to me, you know, with all the help that I get and all the help that my daughter gets and all the counseling that we're going to and all the conversations and all the phone calls and all the pamphlets, she said it's at night that it's the worst. When I have to lock the door, when it's just she and I at home and all the specialists have gone home, there's nobody left to call in the middle of the night. She said, boy, oh boy, from 5 o'clock business day till 8 o'clock the next morning, she said those hours are hell. She said you can almost hear your own heartbeat because there's just nobody out there and you're on your own. This happens sometimes. Even in a practitioner's job, a counselor, caseworker, social worker, probation officer, corrections officer, an attorney, those of you who plan on a career in criminal justice or psychology, you're going to listen to things that's going to cause you even a vicarious trauma, which means you're going to go home after 5 o'clock usually. And you're going to have to sit and think about what you told this client to do as they're sitting in their home till 8 o'clock in the morning. They can't sleep because at night things always look the worst and they're alone. You wind up isolated because there's nothing you can do for them because business day starts the next day, 8 a.m. You're both isolated in some way. So isolation emotionally is not something that only happens to persons who survive horrific situations. It can even happen to us on the job. It can happen to us in everyday life where we feel that we have no place to go. And the truth of the matter is there are going to be some times in our lives where there is no place for us to go. So, what do you think I'd like to do about that today? What I'd like you to do, this would be a good time to either pause me or be prepared to rewind me. But you will need a pen and paper, and I'll give you a moment to go get one. What I would like you to do is I would like you to go out to the web here, the internet, the virtual world, and I would like you to look up the whole idea of practitioners, persons who work in the field, regardless of what they are, victim services, counselors, probation, parole, social workers, attorneys, and find out how they deal with vicarious trauma due to what? Listening to what it is that other people told them happened to them. I would like you to load up your articles or summarize your articles in week number 4 chat. So I'll repeat what I'd like you to do. For week number 4 chat, I would like you to come back with either a summary of an article or the link to an article that talks about vicarious trauma and how it is that people deal with this as a practitioner. How is it that people can withstand 20 and 30 years of listening to people's very sad situations? How is it that you're expected to deal with this? I would like you to go look that up. Also, if I hadn't mentioned this to you before, on Easter Sunday at 6 o'clock at night at 2500 Elmwood Avenue here in Brighton, I'm inviting all of my students for dessert, so I'll just need to know if you're coming or not. Love to see you here. Also, this Saturday at Panera Bread from 6 to 8 at 12 Corners in Brighton, I'm having my first meet and greet. Is it necessary and mandatory? No. If you'd like to come and have a cup of coffee or a cup of tea and come talk about the material, I'd be thrilled to meet with you, as always. I hope this video lecturecast found you well today, enjoying the first day of spring. And always be safe.